Inside the hangar at Honolulu International Airport, a frustrated cluster of engineers surrounded a dismantled Gulfstream G650 engine, mounted on a hydraulic stand. Chrome toolboxes lay scattered across oil-stained concrete. Industrial fans whirred overhead, barely cutting through the oppressive Hawaiian heat. A man in an impeccable charcoal suit checked his Patek Philippe for the 15th time. Engineers dabbed sweat from their foreheads with shop rags. Airport security lingered near the entrance, watching the expensive chaos unfold. Then a voice, clear and steady, cut through the mechanical hum. "If you permit, I will fix it." Every head turned toward the hangar's open bay. A black woman stood silhouetted against the blinding Pacific sunlight, framed by the doorway like an apparition. She wore navy blue coveralls faded from sun and wear, the fabric thin at the knees and elbows. Her natural hair was pulled back in a practical bun, loose coils escaping around her temples. She looked lean, too lean, like someone who had grown used to skipped meals. Oil and grease darkened her fingertips, but her eyes, deep and intelligent, locked onto the engine with laser focus, as if nothing else in the world existed. Nervous laughter rippled through the group, breaking the tension like a snapped wire. "Ma'am, are you serious?" Lead engineer Derek Morrison asked, his smile caught somewhere between amusement and exhaustion. Morrison had worked for Pratt & Whitney for 17 years before going independent. His team had flown in from the mainland specifically for this repair. "We've been troubleshooting this system for 7 hours. One of the younger engineers shook his head, muttering to his colleague. "How did she even get past security?" "Security," another called out, louder. "Can someone escort her out, please?" Two uniformed guards stepped forward, hands moving toward their radios. The man in the charcoal suit, Anthony Martin, billionaire tech mogul and owner of the sleek Gulfstream parked just outside the hangar, raised one hand with quiet authority. "Stop." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that came from building 3 Fortune 500 companies from nothing. The guards froze mid-stride. "In my line of work," Anthony continued, his sharp eyes studying the woman with interest, "I've learned that brilliance doesn't always arrive in the package you expect. Let the young lady speak." The hangar fell silent, except for the distant whine of a departing commercial jet and the metallic tick of cooling engine parts. The woman took one careful step forward, her worn sneakers quiet against the concrete. Her gaze never left the engine. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but certain, "I overheard your team mention an anomalous shutdown sequence during taxi." The engine spooled down prematurely even though fuel flow read normal. She paused, tilting her head as if listening to something no one else could hear. And there was vibration on startup that smoothed out after 30 seconds. "Am I right?" Derek Morrison's jaw went slack. That's exactly what happened," he breathed. "How could you possibly?" Anthony Martin studied the woman's face, the sun-weathered skin, the hollowness in her cheeks, the fierce intelligence burning in those dark eyes. The hangar suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier with possibility. Behind them, the Pacific breeze carried the salt, sharp scent of the ocean through the open bay doors. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter's rotors thumped rhythmically. Inside this weathered hangar, time seemed to hold its breath. "May I look?" The woman asked quietly. For a long moment, no one moved. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. Security waited for direction. The industrial fans kept turning, indifferent to the unfolding drama. Anthony Martin's eyes never left the stranger's face. He saw something there. Something beneath the poverty and the pain. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. The same desperate hunger he'd carried 30 years ago when no one would give him a chance. He made his decision. "Give her the tools," Anthony said. 18 months earlier, Melissa Henderson had stood on a different stage in a different life. The University of Hawaii's auditorium had erupted in applause as she accepted the Distinguished Graduate Award in Aeronautical Mechanics. Her mother Grace had wept in the front row. Her father Thomas had stood with his hand over his heart. 12-year-old Marcus had whispered to everyone around him, "That's my sister." Pacific Rim Aviation's offer letter had arrived 3 days later. Lead engineer, advanced propulsion systems. 6-figure salary. Everything she'd sacrificed for, finally within reach. The San Francisco conference should have been her coronation. She'd presented her research on next-generation turbine efficiency to a room full of industry leaders who actually listened. For once, she wasn't the woman who didn't belong. She was the expert they needed. The hotel phone shattered that dream at 3:17 a.m. "Miss Henderson?" The Honolulu Fire Department captain's voice carried weights she couldn't yet comprehend. "There's been a fire at your family's residence. I'm very sorry. Your parents and brother didn't make it." The words arrived in her ears but made no sense. She'd talked to Marcus just hours before. He'd asked her to bring him a San Francisco Giants cap. She'd promised. The flight home blurred into a nightmare of condolence calls and funeral arrangements. The house, her childhood home, was a blackened skeleton. Electrical fire, they said, started in the walls while everyone slept. "I should have been there," Melissa told the empty living room of her apartment. "I should have been home." The guilt metastasized quickly. She called Pacific Rim Aviation and declined the position, stopped answering calls from friends, let her apartment lease lapse. Each day she woke up alive felt like a betrayal of the family who didn't. The beaches of Oahu became her penance. She drifted from Waikiki to the North Shore, carrying everything in a weathered backpack. But she always circled back to the airport. The sound of jet engines, that deep, powerful roar, was the only thing that didn't hurt. The morning sun had already turned brutal when Melissa approached the private aviation hangars, seeking shade and maybe access to a water fountain. She'd spent the night beneath a palm tree near Reef Runway, lulled to sleep by departing red-eyes. Voices carried through the open hangar bay. Frustrated voices. Technical jargon she understood in her bones. "The FADEC shows normal parameters, but the engine won't maintain spool. Could be fuel contamination, but the samples came back clean. We've checked every damn sensor twice." Melissa edged closer, peering through the gap between hangar doors. 7 engineers in pristine coveralls surrounded a Gulfstream engine. A man in an expensive suit paced nearby, checking his watch with increasing agitation. She recognized the problem from their descriptions alone. Classic dual-fault scenario, one masking the other. "Walk away," her survival instinct whispered. "You're homeless, sun-damaged. They'll laugh at you." But her hands remembered the weight of precision tools. Her mind still held 4 years of rigorous engineering training that grief couldn't erase. Before fear could stop her, Melissa stepped into the light. "If you permit, I will fix it." The reaction came swift: laughter, sideways glances. One engineer muttered something about airport vagrants to his colleague. Another whispered, "How did she get past security?" But the man in the charcoal suit raised his hand, silencing them. "Give her the tools." Melissa's hands trembled as she pulled on the offered gloves, then steadied. She studied the engine with systematic precision, running diagnostics the team had somehow missed. 15 minutes in, she found it. A faulty pressure transducer, sending false readings to the FADEC computer, triggering protective shutdown. But there was more. Secondary ignition timing drift, subtle enough that it hid beneath the transducer's more obvious failure. She corrected both issues with practiced efficiency. When Anthony Martin pressed the starter button, the engine's roar filled the hangar like thunder. "What's your name?" he asked as engineers stood stunned. "Melissa Henderson." Tears blurred her vision. "University of Hawaii class of 2024. I was supposed to start at Pacific Rim Aviation, but..." Her voice cracked. "My family died while I was away. I lost everything." 6 hours later, Melissa sat in Anthony Martin's repaired Gulfstream, watching Honolulu shrink beneath her. The leather seat felt impossibly soft. The cabin smelled of coffee and opportunity instead of salt and survival. "We'll get you sorted in San Francisco," Anthony said across the aisle. "Clean clothes, medical attention, rest, then we talk about your future." The hotel suite overwhelmed her. Marble bathroom, king bed with sheets that didn't smell like beach sand. A woman arrived with professional attire in Melissa's size. A doctor treated the sun damage on her skin and the infected cut on her foot she'd been ignoring for weeks. Staring at her reflection in tailored slacks and a crisp blouse, Melissa whispered, "I don't deserve this." But morning came anyway, and with it, Martin Aviation Solutions headquarters. Anthony's son Jason met them in the lobby. 30 years old, warm brown eyes, engineer's calluses on his hands. He studied Melissa with interest, not pity. "Dad says you diagnosed a dual-fault scenario in 20 minutes. I'm impressed. The boardroom felt like a tribunal. 12 executives in expensive suits, skepticism radiating from every chair. Anthony positioned Melissa at the head of the conference table. Show them what you showed me. They presented a complex turbofan malfunction simulation on the main screen. Melissa analyzed it methodically, her explanation weaving Hawaiian Ike, the holistic observation her grandfather had taught her, with rigorous Western engineering principles. She identified 3 cascading failures the simulation's designers hadn't intended. The room fell silent. Miss Henderson, the chief operating officer, finally said, "We'd like to offer you Director of Pacific Operations. You'd oversee Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, and Japan." Melissa's hands gripped the table's edge. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'll try to be worthy," she whispered. Jason smiled from across the room, and something in Melissa's broken heart trembled with unexpected hope. The headlines hit before Melissa's plane even touched down in Honolulu. From homeless to head of aviation, Melissa Henderson's remarkable rise. Street mechanic named director of Martin Aviation's Pacific Operations. Cameras flashed as she descended the jet bridge. Reporters shouted questions she hadn't prepared for. Anthony had warned her the story would generate interest, but this felt like an avalanche she couldn't outrun. Richard Kawamoto waited inside the terminal, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Melissa had earned in her entire life before last week. He was 52, third-generation aviation professional, his family name synonymous with Hawaiian aerospace excellence. "Miss Henderson." His handshake was firm, his smile precise. "Welcome home. I look forward to working under your leadership." The words were perfect. The coldness behind his eyes was unmistakable. Martin Aviation's Honolulu facility buzzed with divided energy. Younger engineers crowded around Melissa, eager and curious. "Is it true you fixed Mr. Martin's jet in 20 minutes? What was it like being homeless?" Their questions came from genuine fascination, but each one reminded her of the shame still clinging to her skin. The older staff kept their distance, polite nods, professional courtesy. But their skepticism hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Her first major test arrived within 72 hours. The governor's personal jet reported hydraulic irregularities during pre-flight inspection. The assigned team recommended a standard system flush and refill. Melissa reviewed their analysis and felt her instincts screaming opposition. She ordered a complete teardown over the lead mechanic's objections. 6 hours later, they found it. A hairline fracture in the primary hydraulic accumulator. Another 20 hours of flight time and it would have failed catastrophically, likely during takeoff. The governor called personally to thank her. Local news ran the story. New director's expertise saves lives. But in his corner office, Richard Kawamoto stared at the coverage with jaw clenched. His assistant, Margaret Chen, set coffee on his desk and hesitated. "Sir, the governor's office sent flowers from Ms. Henderson." Kawamoto's voice came out flat, bitter. 22 years, Margaret. 22 years I've given this company. I've trained half the mechanics in this facility. I've maintained every governor's aircraft since 2008. He turned from the window, eyes hard, and now a street person, someone who was literally begging for food 6 months ago, takes the position that should have been mine. Margaret said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Meanwhile, on the hangar floor, Melissa faced a different kind of erosion. Small questions that felt like accusations. "Are you sure you understand this system, Director? It's quite complex. Maybe we should have someone double-check your calculations. No offense, but did you actually go to engineering school or—" Each microaggression landed like a paper cut, individually minor, collectively bleeding her confidence dry. But every evening, Jason called from San Francisco. His voice reminded her she'd earned this position. His faith became the foundation she built on when her own felt shaky. Slowly, painfully, Melissa's expertise became undeniable. Her confidence grew even as institutional resistance remained. Jason's transfer to Honolulu came exactly 3 months after Melissa took the director position. Consolidating Pacific Operations Management, the official memo read. But when he appeared in her office doorway with that gentle smile, she knew Anthony had orchestrated it. "Thought you could use someone who actually believes in you," Jason said simply. The late nights started innocently enough. Reviewing maintenance logs over terrible break room coffee, debating turbine efficiency metrics until security reminded them the building was closing. Jason saw aviation the way Melissa did, not as machinery, but as poetry written in metal and physics. He made her laugh for the first time since the fire. A stupid joke about compressor blades that shouldn't have been funny, but somehow was. When he touched her hand across the conference table one evening, Melissa pulled away like she'd been burned. "I can't," she whispered. "Everyone I love dies." Jason didn't push. He just kept showing up, patient, present, understanding that her walls weren't rejection, they were survival. Their first real date happened at Lanikai Beach, watching the sun paint the sky in colors that hurt to look at. The beauty felt obscene when Marcus would never see another sunset. He was 12, Melissa said suddenly, tears streaming. He wanted to be a pilot. I promised I'd teach him about engines when I got back from San Francisco. Her voice shattered. I broke that promise. Jason wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed into his shoulder. When she finally quieted, he spoke softly. Loving again doesn't betray them, Melissa. It honors them. Your brother would want you to be happy. The words cracked something open inside her. Something that had been locked tight since the fire. Dr. Sarah Tanaka's therapy office became Melissa's second home. Twice weekly sessions where she finally confronted the survivor's guilt that had driven her to the streets. The shame of being alive when they weren't. The belief that her ambition had somehow caused their deaths. You didn't kill them, Dr. Tanaka said gently but firmly. Grief isn't punishment, it's love with nowhere to go. Slowly, painfully, Melissa learned to redirect that love toward Jason. Toward building instead of destroying. When Jason proposed, kneeling on the hangar floor where she'd first fixed his father's jet, Melissa said yes through tears that felt different than the ones she'd cried before. These were tears of permission. Permission to live again. Their wedding was small. Sunset ceremony on Kailua Beach, barefoot in the sand. A Hawaiian kahu blessed their union while acknowledging Melissa's lost family. She wore plumeria flowers, Grace's favorite. They released 3 floating lanterns into the Pacific at dusk, one for each family member who couldn't be there. Jason's vows were simple. I see you, all of you, the brilliance and the brokenness, and I choose you. For the first time since the fire, Melissa believed she deserved to be chosen. 2 years into Melissa's leadership, Martin Aviation's Pacific operations had become the company's most profitable division. Client satisfaction scores hit record highs. Safety metrics exceeded FAA standards. Even the skeptical old guard had grudgingly accepted her competence. Then the VP of Operations position opened. Melissa's name appeared on the short list alongside Richard Kawamoto's. The board's decision arrived via email. Melissa Henderson, promoted effective immediately. Kawamoto read the announcement in his office, alone. Something inside him cracked clean through. He found Thomas Chen in the maintenance bay that evening. Chen was 58, a senior mechanic who'd been with the company since before it was called Martin Aviation. He'd trained under Kawamoto's father and resented every directive from Melissa's desk. They're making her VP, Kawamoto said quietly. Chen's wrench stilled mid-turn. The homeless girl? We can't let this stand, Thomas. The company's reputation is at stake. Kawamoto's voice carried the weight of wounded pride disguised as principle. If she's exposed as unqualified, the board will have to act. The plan formed over whiskey in Kawamoto's Kahala home. They would alter digital maintenance records, subtle changes that would show critical inspections skipped, safety protocols ignored. An anonymous tip to the FAA would trigger an investigation. Melissa's lack of traditional corporate background would make the violations believable. The anonymous email sent to the FAA was a masterpiece of calculated malice. Unqualified leadership at Martin Aviation Solutions ignoring mandatory safety protocols, lives at risk. The FAA's surprise inspection notice arrived 48 hours later. Melissa's hands shook as she reviewed the flagged records. Hydraulic inspections marked complete but never performed. Engine overhaul schedules showing dangerous gaps. Her digital signature on documents she'd never seen. This isn't possible, she told Jason that night, voice breaking. I didn't authorize any of this. But the media had already received leaked documents. Headlines exploded across Hawaii and the mainland. Former homeless director accused of safety violations. Martin Aviation under federal investigation. Was Melissa Henderson's rise too fast? Kawamoto appeared in her office the next morning, expression carefully sympathetic. "Melissa, I hate to say this, but perhaps you were promoted too quickly. Managing operations at this scale requires experience you simply don't have." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Maybe it's time to step aside before this gets worse." Melissa stared at him, something cold settling in her chest. His concern felt rehearsed, performed. And for the first time, she wondered if Richard Kawamoto had finally stopped hiding his hatred. Jason didn't sleep that night. While Melissa tossed beside him, trapped in nightmares of losing everything again, he sat at their kitchen table with his laptop, diving deep into the company's digital infrastructure. By 4 a.m., he'd found the first anomaly: metadata timestamps that didn't match, IP addresses accessing records from terminals that should have been locked, digital fingerprints that told a story the falsified documents tried to hide. He called his father at dawn. "Dad, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you install oversight systems when you hired Melissa?" Anthony's silence lasted 3 heartbeats. "Yes, I believed in her, but I'm not a fool. I protect my investments. I need access, now." What the surveillance systems revealed made Jason's blood turn cold. High-resolution footage showed Richard Kawamoto and Thomas Chen in the records room after hours, Kawamoto's hands flying across the keyboard while Chen stood watch. Timestamps matched exactly when the falsified entries appeared in the system. 23 separate instances over 6 weeks. Methodical, deliberate, calculated to destroy. Jason stormed into Melissa's office the next morning with a laptop and a fury she'd never seen in him. Kawamoto and Chen were already there, presenting their concerns about her leadership to the FAA liaison. "Gentlemen," Jason said, voice deadly calm, "I think you should see this." The surveillance footage played on the conference room screen. Every second of their conspiracy captured in crisp, damning clarity. Kawamoto's face drained of color. Chen stood frozen, mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "You," Kawamoto's voice came out strangled. "You were spying on us?" "No," Melissa said quietly, standing. "We were protecting the company from people exactly like you." Kawamoto's composure shattered. "You don't understand what it's like," he shouted. "To spend 22 years building a reputation, training the next generation, earning respect the hard way, only to watch someone who doesn't respect what this industry requires just walk in and take what should be yours." Melissa stepped closer, her voice low and fierce. "I respect it more than you know, Richard. I lost my family, my parents, my 12-year-old brother. Aviation is all I have left of the life I should have lived. It's the only thing that still connects me to who I was before grief destroyed me." Tears streamed down her face. "And you tried to take that too." The federal charges came swiftly. Falsifying aviation safety records, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of federal oversight. The U.S. Attorney's Office took the case personally. Aviation safety violations put hundreds of lives at risk. Media outlets that had crucified Melissa now scrambled to correct the narrative. Director vindicated, senior staff sabotaged safety records in revenge plot. Melissa Henderson, targeted by colleagues resentful of her success. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Kawamoto's attorney tried arguing workplace discrimination drove his client to desperation, but the jury wasn't sympathetic. 8 years in federal prison for both men. Melissa sat in the courtroom as the sentence was read, Jason's hand in hers. She'd won. Justice had been served. So why did victory taste like ashes in her mouth? The first letter arrived 2 years after sentencing. Federal Correctional Institution, Sheridan, Oregon. Richard Kawamoto's precise handwriting filled 3 pages. "Ms. Henderson, I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know, I've spent these 2 years confronting the poison inside me. I've been reading Baldwin, Coates, Kendi, trying to understand the systems I upheld without question. My resentment toward you wasn't about your qualifications. It was about my own insecurity dressed up as tradition. I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Thomas Chen's letter came a week later. Simpler, less eloquent, but no less sincere. "Director Henderson, I was wrong. Jealousy made me cruel. I'm sorry for what we did. I understand if you never forgive me." Melissa stood in her kitchen, letters trembling in her hands, rage and confusion warring inside her chest. "They tried to destroy me," she told Jason that evening. "Why should I help them?" But the question haunted her. She found herself in Anthony's study during a San Francisco visit, the letters spread on his desk. "When you found me," Melissa said quietly, "I was homeless. Broken. No one would have blamed you for walking away." She met his eyes. "You gave me a second chance. What does that mean for how I use power now?" Anthony leaned back, his aged face thoughtful. "Power reveals character, Melissa. You get to decide what kind of leader you want to be." Tanaka's words echoed in her next therapy session. Forgiving them doesn't excuse what they did. It frees you from carrying their bitterness. After 4 years, Melissa petitioned the court for sentence reduction. She testified personally. "These men were wrong. They tried to destroy me and endangered lives. But I believe in restoration, not just punishment. I believe people can change." When Kawamoto and Chen returned to Honolulu, humble, grateful, working as entry-level mechanics, Melissa watched them carefully. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine humility. And she realized forgiveness had healed her more than it ever healed them. The twins arrived during a thunderstorm that rattled Honolulu's windows and reminded Melissa of the night everything changed. Maya came first, screaming her arrival with impressive lung capacity. Grace followed 3 minutes later, quieter but no less determined. "Your mother would have loved them," Jason whispered, watching Melissa cradle both daughters. "She does," Melissa replied softly. "Wherever she is, she does." Anthony Martin held his granddaughters with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My legacy," he whispered, "not my company's. This, you, them." 5 years later, Anthony passed peacefully in his sleep, having lived to see Maya's first words and Grace's first steps. Melissa stood at his funeral before a crowd of hundreds and spoke through tears. "He saw me when I was invisible. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He taught me that second chances aren't charity, they're investments in human potential." Her voice broke. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of his faith." The twins grew up in hangars, learning aviation the way some children learn languages, by immersion. Maya fell in love with flying itself, earning her pilot's license at 17. Grace inherited Melissa's fascination with engines, pursuing aerospace engineering at MIT. By 55, Melissa had transformed Martin Aviation's Pacific operations into the largest aviation hub west of California. But her proudest achievement was the Henderson Martin Scholarship Fund, offering full college tuition to homeless youth pursuing STEM fields. 18 students in the first year, 200 by year 10. Richard Kawamoto became an unexpected ally in the work. After his release, he dedicated himself to restorative justice advocacy, speaking at universities about confronting prejudice and choosing redemption. When he and Melissa appeared together at a TEDx Honolulu talk, the audience gave them a standing ovation. "She had every right to leave me in that prison cell," Kawamoto told the crowd, voice thick with emotion. "Instead, she showed me what grace looks like." The Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony came on Melissa's 60th birthday. Standing in the East Room of the White House, President in front of her, she felt the weight of every moment that had led here. The fire, the streets, the hangar, the fight, the choice to forgive. Kawamoto sat in the audience as her honored guest, weeping openly. Years passed. Melissa's hair turned silver. Her hands developed arthritis that sometimes made precision work difficult, but her mind remained sharp, her passion undimmed. At 68, she stood in the familiar Honolulu hangar watching her granddaughter, Maya's daughter named Olivia, work on a Gulfstream engine with focused intensity. The girl was only 16, but already showed brilliance that made Melissa's heart ache with pride. "Grandma," Olivia called out, "can you check my work?" Melissa approached slowly, studying the repair with practiced eyes. "Perfect," she whispered, "absolutely perfect." That evening, she drove alone to Kailua Beach, the same stretch of sand where she'd once slept homeless and broken. The sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. Somewhere in the distance, a jet engine roared, carrying people toward destinations they'd dreamed of reaching. Melissa sat in the sand, her bare feet caressed by warm Pacific water. She thought of her parents, of Marcus, who never got to see her triumph, of Anthony, who saw her when she was invisible, of Jason, who loved her through the healing, of her daughters and granddaughter, carrying the legacy forward. For the first time since the fire that took everything, Melissa felt complete peace. Not because the pain had disappeared, it never would. But because she'd transformed that pain into something larger than herself, into second chances for others, into proof that tragedy doesn't define destiny. The sun sank below the horizon, and Melissa whispered to the ocean, to the sky, to the family she'd lost and the family she'd built. "If you permit, I will fix it." And she had. Not just jet engines, but broken systems, wounded people, and her own shattered heart. The legacy wasn't in the awards or the achievements. It was in the lives touched, the cycles broken, the grace extended even when revenge would have been easier. Melissa stood, brushing sand from her clothes, and walked toward her car. Tomorrow, she'd return to the hangar. There was always more work to do, more young engineers to mentor, more second chances to offer. The Hawaiian night embraced her, warm and forgiving as she drove home. Behind her, the beach stretched empty and peaceful, waves erasing her footprints as if she'd never been broken there at all. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of redemption, resilience, and the transformative power of second chances. Check out our playlist for similar stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things through courage, forgiveness, and unwavering determination. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives. Subscribe now, and let's keep celebrating the human spirit together.